morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu. My name is Eleanor, and I will be your worship associate this morning. Do we have Zaffi? Would you be willing to light the chalice? Excellent, please come. So as Zaffi lights the chalice, please join me in these words. We light this chalice with the embers of compassion. We light this chalice with the torch of justice. We light this chalice with the radiance of joy.
Hi. My name is Nancy Schultz, and I'll be telling the story for all ages this morning. It's an old story that you will be familiar with. It's a fable, but this is a version by Ed Young, and it's 7 Blind Mice. Now, once...
Nancy, do you want me to hold it for
Oh,
you?
that'll be great. Thank you. Once, there were 7 brightly colored blind mice, but they didn't know they were brightly colored. And they were walking down a pond to their pond one day, and they ran into something strange. And the first red mouse ran into his legs. Into some pillars. They were big, and he felt them, all the pillars all around, and he said, "There's pillars in the way of our path." And the next mouse said, "Well, I will come and see too," but he couldn't see. So he went, with 4 legs. 4 legs. And he came and he felt. Whoops! Can you put him by the? We have little technical difficulties. And he felt something long and slithery, and he said, "That's not pillars. That's a big snake." Yeah. And so the third mouse came along and said, "I'll check it out." And he came over and he felt something hard and sharp. And he said, "That's not slithery snake. That seems like a big spear, sharp spear in the way of our path." And then the fourth pink mouse came along. "I'll check it out." And he came and he started walking and climbing up. He said, "That feels like a big cliff." No, nothing yet. "Cliff to me." And now you can stick your eye. And the fifth mouse came on Friday, and he felt something floppy and waving in the wind. And he said, "That's a fan. I felt it moving." Whoops. Anyway. And the Saturday, the sixth blue mouse came along, and he came from the back of it. And he said, "You are all wrong. That's waving in the wind, and it feels like a long rope." Now, the last day, the white mouse came along, And he ran all over the creature. He ran up and down and around and back and forth. And he said, that something is as sturdy as a pillar. That something is
As supple as a snake.
that something is
As wide as a cliff.
that something is 4. As breezy as a fan. That something is, who's got number 5? Loud.
As sharp as a spear.
And then the last one, he said that, last 6. Okay. What is it? As stringy as a rope. So he looked all around and he said, that's all together, if you looked at it all together, that is an elephant. And sure enough, if you look at the whole thing, it is an elephant. It's not a rope, it's not pillars, it's not a fan, right? And the moral of the story is, sometimes if you meet someone and maybe there's some part of them you didn't like and you didn't want to get to know them, like they might not smell right, or they might just bring potato chips to a potluck or something. But they might be very interesting people if you look at the whole picture, right? And they might need a friend. So, okay. Now it's time to sing the children to their class.
Okay, if we can make a bridge, and we'll sing our Kiki off to your classes. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
The opening words this morning are by bell hooks. Within complex and ever-shifting realms of power relations, do we position ourselves on the side of colonizing mentality? Or do we continue to stand in political resistance with the oppressed, ready to offer our ways of seeing and theorizing, of making culture, towards that revolutionary effort which seeks to create space where there is unlimited access to the pleasure of power, of knowing? Where transformation is possible, this choice is crucial. It shapes and determines our response to existing cultural practice and our capacity to envision new, alternative, oppositional aesthetic acts. Let us worship.
Our reading this morning is actually a video reading, so I invite you to view this video with intentionality. Someone from the first service actually came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, Jonathan, I didn't realize you started moonlighting as the PR agent for Airbnb." It's actually not the case, but as I saw this video, I thought, wow, what a great tie-in from our message throughout the month of August about radical hospitality. And I thought to myself, these are the same values that we Unitarian Universalists ought to be standing up for. Because notice how clear she was at the beginning about what the culture dictates. She says, here in Korea, we don't begin a conversation with, "Hi, how are you?" We ask someone, have they eaten yet? In other words, food is so critical and so crucial to one's well-being and one's identity even. Notice how she said that, yes, we do for the most part serve Korean food, but we realize that sometimes when people come from other parts of the world, they may not like what we have to serve. So that's when we switch over to pasta. Can't go wrong with pasta, right? And so I thought that was quite telling as to what it would take to build a multicultural household. And so that's the question I want to delve into today, is how do we create a multicultural environment? In her case, she said that the word used to describe this is chong, that there's really not a literal translation, but it's that certain je ne sais quoi about when you feel like you are warmly embraced and that you're invited to come somewhere and that there's an emotional sharing that takes place there. So can we here at the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu also have that chong present every time someone walks into our midst? Can we change our operating model so that we would become Spirit B&B? So that's the question, and that's the direction that I'd like to embark on this morning. And in order to do that, I really feel like we need to get down to the basics. What is the foundation for our desire for a multicultural community and a multicultural world? Is it just so that we could pat ourselves in the back and say, aren't we such good liberals? Aren't we politically correct that we are anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural? Or is there something deeper than that? Is there a deeper yearning behind our desire to build the world that we could only dream about? In order to answer this, I'd like us to explore what some of the other theologies are that are out there. So back in 1995, a theologian by the name of Jung-Young Lee, who's Korean American, wrote a book called Marginality, the Key to Multicultural Theology. And in this book, he talks about 3 different ways in which we could view marginality. The first way is what he calls an in-between view of marginality. And what does he mean by this? An in-between view recognizes the fact that there are indeed margins, and there's also what's at the center. Let me give you an example of this. When I moved from the Philippines to America, I felt like I was in that in-between space. I left my old culture behind and my family behind to embark on a new journey in a new territory. And I knew that I did not quite fit in the center anymore. All of this is foreign to me. And people viewed me the same way. I didn't even need to have them say that, yeah, we're marginalizing you. I could just tell because of the way I looked, the outfit that I wore, my thick, heavy Filipino accent, that I did not belong in the majority, that somehow I was threading along on the margins, not quite fitting in. Well, a few years later, hopefully my accent has changed into a Southern California one, which is a Valley Girl accent, right? Like, oh my gosh, totally. That hopefully after then, I then began taking on what Lee calls the in both stage. That as I began to feel more and more comfortable, I realized that I was both Asian and American. Not American in terms of being Caucasian or Haole, but American in terms of realizing the diversity and the plurality that does make up what America is all about. And it helps, of course, to have a Haole husband to teach me some of these ways of how to be howlier than thou. And so over time, I began living in this in-both reality. And Jung-Young Lee actually says that with each of these two models, there's also limitations to them. The first one, the in-between, could sometimes feel like you're stuck, that you're perpetually the one being marginalized, that you're the victim, and that on the other side, society is the perpetrator of the marginalization, yeah? And they had that label and that title all the time, and you had your label all the time. And the thing about the in both stage, too, is that it could sometimes feel schizophrenic. And, you know, I talked to some of my Hapa friends about this, and it kind of feels like, yeah, you're in both worlds, but you're constantly having to navigate back and forth, and it could be quite jarring. And so Jung-Young Lee says that perhaps there's a third way, and that's to incorporate both in between and in both to create in beyond. In beyond. So is there a way to transcend those two aspects of it? Here's how he defines in beyond. One does not leave marginality. Rather, one becomes a new marginal person who overcomes marginality without ceasing to be a marginal person. Does that make sense? It's kind of like saying, you know what I mean when I know what you know that I know? So that's what he's saying here, right? And one lives in both realms without being bound by either of them. So in many ways, this is actually quite liberating because it doesn't get stuck with just one model, but it assumes that one, even though one is marginalized, one can still transcend and move beyond the boundaries and the borders that has been set up. And it also assumes that throughout one's life, one is living in a dynamic world, not a static world. And so, being Korean, he uses the imagery of the Korean flag. We all know the symbol in the middle there. It's a yin-yang sign, yeah? So the idea is that margin and center are constantly moving around and weaving into the other. An example of this is that, yeah, there are certain parts of my identity that have been historically marginalized. Being Asian, I just named, being gay, or being Gaysian. That's marginality for you, right? It's a double whammy. And, but I also have other parts of me that are part of the center, part of privilege and part of power. Being male, embodied individual, that's power right there. And also being able-bodied, that has a lot of power associated with it that many of us take for granted. And so how can these two elements go in beyond one another? And it's surrounded, it's a beautiful flag actually, because it's surrounded by the I Ching on all four corners. So this is what produces the dynamic nature of life. All right, are we ready for an example now? Are we ready to dissect this sermon as Eleanor indicated? So here, I'm going to show another video, and hopefully this time this video works, of a very popular music video that came out of South Korea. All right, you get the picture. How many churches have you been to that shows the Gangnam video? How does this relate to a theology of marginality? Well, I'm sorry? Good question. Thank you, Eleanor. Aren't you glad I asked it? So, in between. Well, first of all, let me just say and point out, by the way, that when this video first came out, it was never intended to have such a broad audience. It came out in Korea, and it's all in Korean for the most part. And 126 days later, after it came out on YouTube, it received 1 billion hits. And as of May 31st of 2014, which is 525 days later, or after its initial launch, it received 2 billion hits. Now, Eleanor just told me that that actually doesn't translate into 2 billion people all over the world having seen this, but that's still a heck of a lot of people having done it Gangnam style. Yeah? So obviously, it touched on the heartstrings of people around the world. So the first part, the in-between, as we could probably notice, is that there is a certain level of marginality around Asian male singers. How many Korean male singers do you know of? Right? And yet, if you, well, one, Psy, but if you looked at how many people in the world know of American pop stars, it's so disproportionate. And yet, let me tell you, it's not for a lack of quality Korean male pop stars. There's Rain, there's other folks that are popular, K-pop stars that are popular all over Asia and not even just in Korea. It's just that they don't make it quite to America. And part of the reason why is because Asian males aren't really perceived to be sexy. We don't have that Latin spicy flavor or the virility of African American males, supposedly, right? That we're somehow effeminized by Western culture. Ever notice that? And this is the in both part, that this video plays on those stereotypes. You recognize Psy in the Korean spa wearing a sarong or a towel that is very feminine and leaning in on the guy next to him, right? So there's that effeminate quality about it, and yet it's in both because he also plays to the masculine part by being a ladies' man and a playboy. Notice him checking out those hot babes doing yoga at the end, yeah? So there's that in both element as well. And when it comes to the in beyond aspect, 2 billion hits. I bet you anything that there's a different component to it that people identify with, and people are either laughing at him or they're laughing with him, all depending on their own cultural context. So I heard, for example, that even in Korea, Psy is viewed very differently, depending on what class level you belong to. So sometimes there's this snootiness that's not appropriate for how people perceive Korean music to be. Or sometimes there's a sense of empathy and connection, saying that, yeah, we could relate to that. So even amongst the different cultures, even amongst one's own culture, there's a sense of in beyond. And how can you go viral and transcend those cultures as well? How can you have a dynamic view of what difference is all about? So there's actually even a book written about doing a theology of Gangnam Style. Check it out. It's written by Dr. Joseph Chia and also Grace Kim. And here's what they had to say. I saw this on the Huffington Post about how Gangnam Style could be an in beyond thing when it comes to whether we're laughing at him or with him. Whether we're laughing at or laughing with Psy, our laughter has an ethical dimension grounded in the principle of human dignity. You would have thought that they were UUs talking about the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Yeah, our first principle. They continue to say, sometimes laughter belittles another and causes pain and hurts. However, authentic laughing with someone can actually affirm the dignity of the human person. Such laughter can unite us with people of different cultures and background. It can make life tolerable when we find ourselves in an adverse situation that is unbearable. Ever notice that's why Jewish people are so funny? Same with gay people, right? And if you have gay Jews, oh, they're hilarious. It can help us cope with circumstances that would otherwise consume us. As such, our laughter can give value and dignity to the human person, or it can bring out the disdainful aspects of human nature in treating others as objects of ridicule and objectification. So there you have it, folks, a theology of Gangnam Style. The question for us, I sometimes wonder if Psy even gives a hoot what we say about him. As long as he's rolling in the dough and as long as he's getting 2 billion hits, I'd be happy as a clam. I could care less about all this theology of in between, in both, or in beyond, yeah? But I do think that we, as people of faith, we, as Unitarian Universalists, if we are going to try to figure out this multiculturalism thing, perhaps we should be more concerned about how we engage in this dance. Perhaps we should ask ourselves whether we find ourselves in the margins or whether we find ourselves in the center of how we could reach out beyond our comfort zones, beyond those things that are familiar to us, beyond those that we circle ourselves with. Can we expand that realm of friendship as Spirit B&B? Can we practice chong to one another? So my friends, as we go forth from here, I invite you to this dance. So if you feel comfortable rising in body or in spirit as you're able, assume the position. Church, let's go forth from here and do it Gangnam style.